Next, our special speaker for the morning. He's pastor, United States Air Force, and retired Keith Bohley.
I hope everybody's able to stay warm enough. I appreciate the honor to be invited, and I was encouraged to be brief, and I will. My honor guard, are you folks doing all right over there? I've been watching you because I learned from a chief when I was doing a service, and he indicated to me that there's a 21-gun salute, but there's 22 rounds, and there's one live, one for long-winded preachers, and I understood that. And I've made it my dedication to try to keep brevity to the point. And I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts this morning. I want to string three thoughts together for you. I'm first of all delighted that some of our young folks are here. As our cadet spoke, he indicated that there is indeed a lack around the ideas of Memorial Day. And the very essence of paying honor. We teach our children. My wife and I went around to some cemeteries yesterday and laid wreaths on family members. It's been a tradition of her family. It was performed by her grandmother and now her mother, and after her mother's passing, my wife. And we have done that. And it's helps us to remember, and we are hoping and praying, and we have a granddaughter that we hope will eventually pick up and understand what it is to go into those places and lay those wreaths and remember those family and to remember what it was, a deep part of service. And so I'm glad that you're here today to try to pass the message onward. I'm delighted that we can have some of our young people, and it's more than simply decorating, it's more than simply a parade, but it is a memorial event within our hearts and lives. And so I want to give you three things. First of all, it is that it's the passing of the promise. There is a passing of the promise, we are protected. It is a passing of the promise. This last year, my wife and I had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., and when we were there, we walked the mall and saw some of those memorials, and then went down to Washington, another Mount Vernon. When we did, I was just overcome by the greatness of the man and what took place in this nation at its inception. We know a lot of the stories of Washington. We know Valley Forge. We know the hardships that he went through. He served his country humbly. He was the first president. He would have rather been at home developing agricultural practices and writing. It was his heart's desire, but he served his country. And when he finally was able to retire and pick up what he desired to do, what he wanted to do, he was very quickly caught out in a thunderstorm, a quick storm that came up. He got wet. Within a few weeks, he caught pneumonia and died. And I thought of the hardships of Valley Forge and all that went on in that, and him surviving that, and then going home to retire and to do his heart's desire, well deserved. And within a few, literally weeks, he had died of pneumonia while out riding his horse. We have to press the promise forward. We have to pass that promise of the greatness of what it is that we are all about and what's been built upon shoulders upon shoulders upon shoulders. So I desire you develop that, but you want to pass the promise. The second thing is that you want to learn the lessons. So you pass the promise and you learn the lessons. And the lessons are something that are worthy to remember. I read an article in a newspaper, and it may have been the local paper here, but it was a letter to the editor, and a few years back when an individual talked about his desire, and again, rightfully so, concerned about our conflict in Iraq and Iran and our conflicts, and remembering that during World War II he had been a pacifist. And I thought about that, and I thought about what a great nation it is that we have those kinds of opportunities presented to us. And as I was thinking about that, as I read that article, that letter, another thought came over me, and the thought was that there are just tens of millions of Jews that are so delighted that not everybody held those same positions. Somebody has to stand in the breach. Somebody has to stand and protect. As you read, it's the soldier. That's an important piece. We teach our children about bullying in school, and we want to stand against that, and it just seems to be more and more of the personal conflicts. And then I think of students and young students that I know who have stepped into situations to help a friend who was being bullied at some risk to his own safety, and then sat and cried with the young man. There are always those in the world who will bully, who will take advantage, and there is a necessity for those to stand up and defend. We need to learn those lessons and hold them dear. The third thing that I would want you to do is to forge the future. It was this week, in Forging the Future, it was this week in 1944. And a man was working on his dairy farm, milking his cows. 6 in the morning, something he did every morning is you milk your cows. And all of a sudden there began to be a rumble and a roar that grew more intense and vibrated the barn. And I'm sure the cows didn't milk well that day or for a few days in the future, and he ran out. And here was a B-24 Liberator making a bank and coming back at about 500 feet. And he waved his milk stool in his hand as a salute as that B-24 with throttles to the wall at 500 feet, coming out of Omaha, Nebraska, headed across the Atlantic and into the heartland of Germany and 40 missions. He was saluting his 20-year-old son. And he was hopeful as he forged the future, because his father had been born and was in a orphanage in Germany, and his mother was from Germany. He was born in the late 1800s in this country, and now he was sending his only son, the future of the family farm and the operation he wanted back on the farm. He was sending that son into Germany, and he waited patiently and diligently as his wife and he prayed for safe return for that son. You forge out those futures. That son returned. And when he returned, he continued to do what many of you are, to pick up the pieces of the future and put it together and be a part of the local politics, and be a part of the school board, and to be a part of the future of a small community like this all across the United States. And he maintained the family farm. His son grew up there. And though the old man with the milk stool didn't remember it, would never live to see it, his great-grandson and great-great-grandson were also able to visit and be a part of that family farm. You need to forge a future. You need to see that what took place was forging a future, but it's different. It's different when things go awry and we don't get the desired result and we don't come home. There is a cost that is given. My son served 3 tours, and Iraq and Afghanistan, and his mother and I, just as my grandfather prayed for his father, prayed for our son and his safe return. Eve Bunting writes a book, and I'll just close by reading this book if you got a minute or 5. And it's called The Wall. If you're familiar with it, and some of you have read it, I've read it to our first graders on Veterans Day for some years. And it is about the Vietnam Memorial Wall. I have been there. It's stark in what it represents. Again, my wife and I were there this last year and went down of an evening past the Korean Memorial and to the Vietnam Memorial, and just touched the wall and its coldness and what it represents. My first experience with the wall was with a group of high school children a number of years ago, and my son was a student, and his good friend was a student, and his good friend's dad was making his first visit to the Vietnam Wall. And in making that visit, he was remembering. And it was one of those, not traumatic, but just dynamic, life-changing moments as he touched the wall and remembered leading a squad out into the bush and pointing to a tripwire. And in the process of that, the newbie who had just joined the squad didn't get the tripwire seen and tripped it and blew him up. And now, years and years later, he was back at the wall in remembering. That's the wall that Eve Bunting writes about. And I want to leave you with this as you think about your children and your children's children, and from generation to generation, what is sacrificed, what is given, and what you hold. This is the wall, my grandfather's wall, and on it are names of those killed in a war long ago. Where is Grandpa's name, I asked. It's a little boy. We have to find it, Dad says. And he and I have come a long way for this, and we walk slowly along searching. If you've been to the wall, you understand this. The wall is black and shiny as a mirror, and it is that. And in it I can see Dad and me. It's mirroring. And I can see the bare trees behind us and the dark flying clouds. And a man in a wheelchair stares at the names, and he doesn't have any legs. And I'm looking, and he sees me looking, and he smiles. "Hi, son," he says, and I respond, "Hi." His hat is a soft, squishy green, and there are medals on it, and his pant legs are folded back, and his shirt is a soldier's shirt. And then a woman is standing there, an old woman, as old as my grandma would be, and is hugging a man as old as my grandpa would have been, and they're both crying. "Shh," she whispers, "shh." And flowers and and other things have been laid against the wall, and there are little flags and old teddy bears and letters weighted down with stones so they won't blow away, and someone has left a rose with a droopy head. Memories, thoughts, memorials. "Have you found Grandpa yet?" I ask. And "No," Dad says. There are so many names, and they are listed under the years that they were killed. I found 1967. That's when my grandpa died. Dad runs his fingers along the rows of print, and I do too, and the letters march side by side like rows of soldiers. They're nice and even. It's better printing than I can do, and the wall's warm. Dad is searching and searching. Albert A. Jensen, Charles Bronski, George Munoz, he mutters. And his fingers stop moving. Here he is. "My grandpa?" I ask. Dad nods. "Your grandpa." And his voice blurs. "My dad, he was just my age when he was killed." When my grandfather stood out and watched that B-24 come over the top of the barn, it was piloted by a 20-year-old, and I will use the term kid. And many of you here today remember those days in your age when you faced some of those combat situations. Dad's rubbing the name, rubbing and rubbing as if he wants to wipe it away. Maybe he just wants to remember the way it feels. I think so. He lifts me, I touch it too. It has meaning. We brought paper. Dad puts it over the letters and rubs it up with a pencil so the paper grows dark and the letters show up white. You've got part of another guy's name, I tell him. Dad looks at the paper. "Your grandpa won't mind." And I said, "They're probably his friends or friends of his." "Maybe so," Dad responds. And a man and a boy walk past. "Can we go to the river, Grandpa?" the boy asks. "Yes." The man takes the boy's hands. "But button your jacket. It's cold outside." My dad stands very still with his head bent, and a bunch of big girls in school uniforms come down the path. Their teacher is with them, and they're all wearing more of those little flags, you know. And is this the wall of the dead, Miss Gerber? One of them asks in a loud voice. "The names are of the dead, but the wall is for all of us," the teacher says. They make a lot of noise and ask a lot of questions, and all the time Dad just stands with his head bowed, and I stand beside him. The girls stick their flags in the dirt in front of the wall and leave, and then there's quiet again. Dad folds the paper that has Grandpa's name on it and puts it in his wallet, and he slides out a picture of me. One of the yucky ones they took in school. You know, Mom made him wear a tie. Where was Mom this morning? Dad put the pictures on the grass below Grandpa's name. It blows away. And I get it, and I put it back, and I pile small stones on top, and my face smiles up at me from under the stones. Grandpa won't know who I am, I tell Dad. It's part of the price that we pay. Oh, I think he will, Dad says. And I move closer to them. It's sad here. He puts his hand on my shoulders. I know, but it's a place of honor. And I'm proud that your grandfather's name is on the wall. See, there is something to remember from generation to generation. And he tells the little boy, I'm glad that your grandfather's name is on the wall. And the little boy says, I am too. I am. But I would rather have my grandfather here with me, taking my hand and walking me to the river and telling me to button my coat. Freedom is not free. It is costly. To those who pay it all, it is costly. That who saw it and came home in honor. Freedom, as we know, isn't free, but it is worth the price. May you remember. Thank you.